Today, we're discussing high leverage practices in special education, strategies that consistently make the biggest difference for students with disabilities in real classrooms, not just in textbooks. One thing I always tell educators is this: students with disabilities do not need lower expectations. They need stronger systems, intentional instruction, and consistent support. These practices are called high leverage because they have a high impact on student learning, behavior, engagement, and independence across all grade levels and disability categories. And honestly, if you have ever taught during the week before a holiday break, survived an IEP meeting that lasted 3 hours, or tried to redirect a student while the fire alarm suddenly goes off, congratulations! You already know why strong instructional practices matter. Let's start with explicit instruction. In real classrooms, students with disabilities often struggle when instruction is vague, rushed, or assumes background knowledge that students may not have. Explicit instruction means modeling, clear expectations, guided practice, checking for understanding, and breaking learning into manageable steps. I often compare it to GPS directions. Most students can eventually get to the destination, but some students need clearer turn by turn guidance. One of the biggest mistakes schools make is assuming repeated exposure automatically equals learning. It does not. I remember observing a classroom where the teacher asked students to write a paragraph summarizing the reading. Half the class stared at the paper like the directions were written in another language. The teacher thought the students were refusing. In reality, the students did not know how to organize a paragraph, how to identify key details, or how to start. Explicit instruction closes that gap. Scaffolding is one of the most misunderstood practices in education. Scaffolding is not doing the work for students. It is providing temporary support until students can perform independently. Think about riding a bike. Training wheels are not the long-term goal. Independence is. In classrooms, scaffolding might include sentence starters, graphic organizers, chunked assignments, visual supports, guided notes, or teacher prompting. The challenge for educators is knowing when to provide support and when to gradually remove it. I have seen classrooms where students become dependent on adult support because scaffolding was never faded. And I have also seen the opposite: teachers removing support too early because they wanted students to be independent. Both extremes can create problems. Strong educators constantly adjust support based on student performance. This practice may not be one of the most powerful instructional tools teachers have. Students need immediate, specific, and corrective feedback, not good job, not try harder, but meaningful feedback like, you identified the main idea correctly, But let's work on adding supporting details. Feedback should guide improvement, not shut students down. And timing matters. If a student practices a skill incorrectly for 3 days before receiving correction, the error becomes harder to fix. One thing I always tell new teachers: students with disability often spend years hearing what they are doing wrong. Effective feedback maintains dignity while improving performance. The balance matters tremendously. This is where instruction and behavior intersect. Many students with disabilities struggle with emotional regulation, attention, organization, frustration tolerance, and self monitoring. Self regulation strategies teach students how to manage themselves instead of relying entirely on adult correction. Examples include goal setting, self monitoring checklists, behavior tracking, schedule breaks, coping strategies, and reflection tools. I once worked with a student who was sent out of class almost daily for emotional outbursts. What finally changed things was not punishment. It was teaching the student how to recognize escalation early and request a break appropriately. Sometimes we expect students to demonstrate skills we have never explicitly taught. Some students require significantly more support than others. Intensive intervention means more individualized instruction, increased frequency, targeted skill practice, smaller group instruction, and ongoing progress monitoring. This is where educators often feel overwhelmed because these students require substantial planning and consistency. But intensive intervention does not mean lowering rigor. It means increasing support. One of the biggest leadership mistakes schools make is assigning the student with the greatest behavior or academic needs to the least experienced staff without support structures. High needs students require highly skilled instruction. I always encourage educators and administrators to reflect honestly on implementation because most schools know about high leverage practices. The real question is, are they happening consistently in classrooms every day? Sometimes schools say, we use scaffolding, but students receive no visual supports. Or we provide feedback, but students only hear correction after failure. Implementation fidelity matters. This is also where administrators play a major role through coaching, walkthroughs, scheduling, staffing, and professional development. Teachers cannot sustain strong instructional practices without system level support. As we close today, I want you to think practically. What is one practice you can strengthen immediately in your classroom or school? Because improving outcomes for a student with disability does not usually come from one giant program purchase. It comes from improving everyday instructional decisions. Small, consistent changes create long-term student growth. The most effective special education classrooms are not perfect classrooms. They are responsive classrooms. High leverage practices work because they focus on clarity, consistency, relationships, responsiveness, and intentional instruction. And ultimately, these practices do more than improve academics. They increase confidence, independence, engagement, and opportunity for students with disabilities. Thank you for the work you do every day to support students and families. Thank you and goodbye.